Imagine for a moment that beneath the words you speak and the thoughts you catch in passing, there exists a riversolent, constant, unseen. You do not hear its current, but you are moved by it. It shapes your days, steers your moods, and chooses your reactions before you realize they were chosen. This river is not made of emotion alone, nor is it simply a swirl of memories. It is thought-layered, persistent, and so deeply accepted that it no longer feels like thought at all. It feels like reality. But it is not. It is suggestion, internalized, and made invisible by repetition. As Joseph Murphy once taught, the subconscious mind is not some mystical fog to be penetrated, but a soil always accepting, always growing, always obedient to the seed planted. And those seeds are your thoughts, your beliefs, your assumptions, the silent commands you issue every hour of your life. Most of them you do not even hear anymore. But the subconscious hears, always. So before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. Now, listen closely. You are living a life shaped not by what you hope for, but by what you deeply expect. This expectation is not loud. It does not declare itself. It hums underneath your decisions. It colors the way you enter a room, the way you interpret a silence, the way you breathe when money is mentioned or love is withdrawn. And this is the secret no one told you early enough. The world responds not to your surface desires, but to the silent tone of your inner voice. It does not follow your panic or your performance. It follows your suggestion. You don't have to chant it or scream it. You only need to believe it quietly, consistently, and emotionally. The voice that shapes your life is not the one you use in public. It's the one that speaks when you are alone in the kitchen, when your eyes are open in the dark, when you catch your own reflection and think without words. This is who I am. And so we begin here, not with technique, but with truth. You are already issuing commands to your subconscious. Right now, with every thought you dwell on, every emotion you allow to repeat, you are giving instructions coded, spiritual instructions about who you are and what your life must contain. You do not beg the subconscious. You suggest to it, you saturate it, you infuse it with feeling, and over time, it obeys not because it is a servant but because it is the perfect mirror. What you impress, it reflects. Not always instantly, but always. So understand this. The mind you are using is not divided into truth and liacit, is divided into awareness and automation. If you're unaware of the suggestions you've allowed to dominate, they become automation. They become your luck, your story, your struggle. But all along, it was only a stream of unseen commands, some borrowed, some inherited, some repeated in fear. The miracle is this. You can interrupt that stream. You can plant a new suggestion. And if you understand the law behind that planting, it will grow just as real as the ones that came before. There is no need to tear your past apart or wage war against your so-called limitations. You only need to introduce a stronger, more consistent commandone that feels like peace, not effort. This is not about forcing thoughts. That never worked. It is about aligning with truth so deeply that the false cannot hold its shape. It is about speaking within not to impress the world, but to instruct the mind, and that instruction must be alive, not robotic, not dry, but felt. You don't need 100 affirmations. You need one truth, felt with enough emotional certainty to override a lifetime of noise. That is power. That is suggestion in its most potent form. Not flashy, not loud, just clear. Every thought is a suggestion. Every repeated phrase, every image you dwell on, every conversation you replay in your head is all prayer, all direction, all command. The universe is not separate from your inner state. It is responding to it. The outer is not some random chaos. It is echo. Echo of what? Echo of your dominant assumptions. So ask yourself, with sobering honesty, not in fear, but in power, what commands have I been issuing in silence? What tone lives beneath my words, beneath my smile, beneath my plans? You are not guilty for what you once believed. you were likely unaware. But now you are becoming conscious, and consciousness is always the first step to dominion, not control dominion. The difference is this: control panics. Dominion understands the law. So let this be the beginning of your return to inner authorship, not hype, not magical thinking, but law. There is a silent language being spoken through you. It's time to learn it. It's time to speak it with authority, intention, and love. Because nothing moves until mind moves. And mind is always moved first by suggestion. There's a reason your body tenses when you think of certain outcomes. A reason your breath shallows when you anticipate a situation that hasn't even occurred. That reason isn't chance, it's cause. Thought precedes biology. It instructs the nerves, the glands, the muscles. It patterns your posture. It alters your tone of voice. And eventually, it defines your experience of the world not just emotionally but physically. You are not a spirit trapped in flesh. You are spirit expressing as flesh. And that expression is shaped by suggestion. What you accept with conviction is received by the subconscious as a command. And the subconscious, through complex biological and psychological channels, begins to bring it about through tension or relaxation, through confidence or contraction, through health or imbalance. The body doesn't act alone. It obeys the mood of mind. That's why healing often begins not with medication, but with recognition. You begin to see that the pain isn't just in the body. It was first in the belief. You may not have noticed it at the time, but it was there. A sense of dread, a pattern of self-attack, a tone of unworthiness so familiar it seemed like personality. But it wasn't. It was programming. That's how deep suggestion goes. Your skin renews itself under the influence of belief. Your immune system responds to it. Your heartbeat adjusts to it. Science, in its more honest moments, has already confirmed this. But long before science arrived, the mystics knew thought governs form. This isn't metaphor, it's mechanics. When you imagine failure, the body prepares for it. When you envision harm, adrenaline surges. And when you mentally rehearse an identity of lack, when you say, even silently, I don't think I'll make it, your subconscious listens. It hears you. And because it cannot reject what you emotionally accept, it begins the work of fulfillment, quietly, systematically. It calls on memory, on opportunity, on bodily states, to shape a life that matches the command. This is not punishment, it's precision. The subconscious is not cruel, it is obedient. It does not sort by good or bad, it sorts by intensity. Whatever you believe most intensely, it will express most thoroughly. So if your dominant inner dialogue is rooted in fear, guess what unfolds? Not because you deserve to suffer, but because the law is perfect, not emotional, not moral perfect. And here is where your power returns. The moment you understand that form follows feeling not just as mood, but as rooted suggestion, you can begin to turn the wheel. This is not about suppression. You don't need to pretend you're fine. But you do need to recognize that every unchallenged thought becomes a sculptor. Every internal assumption is a blueprint being handed to the builders of your being. And those builders, your cells, your reflexes, your choices, will follow that blueprint with astonishing loyalty. What you tolerate in thought becomes what you tolerate in life. So the invitation is simple. Become vigilant, not paranoid aware, not obsessed. You do not need to fear your thoughts, but you do need to choose them. Begin by observing what rises in the mind when you're still. Listen to the tone, the suggestion, the images that present themselves as normal. You'll find, more often than not, that they are echoes of parents, of culture, of trauma, not truth. But here's the breakthrough. The subconscious doesn't care where the suggestion came from. It only cares that you accepted it. And now, you get to withdraw that acceptance. You are not obligated to continue issuing commands you didn't consciously choose. You can revoke old suggestions, not by force but by replacing them. That's the key. The subconscious cannot entertain two opposing truths with equal emotional weight. One will always dominate. So your work is not to attack the old, it's to impress the new with greater clarity, greater emotion, and greater consistency. That's how form changes. A person who once lived in fear begins to walk taller, not because life suddenly changed, but because their suggestion changed, their dominant thought changed. Their internal command became one of safety, of strength, of divine order, and the body responded. The voice changed, the spine realigned, the eyes became clear. Why? Because thought always becomes flesh. Even your environment shifts under the pressure of persistent thought. The opportunities you notice, the people you attract, the risks you take, they all flow from that inner stream. Change the stream, and the life rearranges. But only if you do it consistently. Brief flashes of positivity won't override decades of silent defeat. But steady inner suggestion will. So here is a truth to hold. You are not just thinking. You are programming. You are planting commands into a soil that cannot ignore them. And in time, that soil responds with form, with feeling, with lived reality. The body, the finances, the relationships, they are all extensions of thought made visible. Do not let this burden you. Let it liberate you, because if your thoughts built what is, they can build what will be. You are not too late. You are not too broken. You are not too far down the wrong path. You are simply ready. Ready to choose again. Ready to speak with conviction not to the world, but to the deepest part of yourself. And from there, everything changes. The laws of suggestion are not emotional, they are mechanical. You are not pleading with a universe to favor you. You are operating within a framework so precise it mirrors you back without preference, without filter, without delay except the delay you impose through hesitation, through contradiction, through believing and doubting in the same breath. This is why it matters what you accept, not just once, but repeatedly. The subconscious does not operate on wishful thinking. It responds to the vibration of certainty. When you say, "I am safe," but live with clenched shoulders and a guarded tone, the body listens to your posture, not your words. The mind accepts what is felt as real, and suggestion becomes a creative act the moment feeling fuses with repetition. So often, people try to speak over their fear. They chant affirmations like armor. But the armor is thin when fear still rules the throne. You cannot layer truth over panic and expect it to bloom. You must first see the panic for what it is, a suggestion that went unchecked. It grew not because it was true, but because it was fed. And you can stop feeding it. That fear that visits you at night, the one that tightens your chest before sleep, isn't mystical. It's a thought that became dominant. It was rehearsed, not revealed. And just as you once made it strong, you can now make it irrelevant. Not by wrestling with it, but by starving it of belief and saturating your inner world with a deeper truth. This is not passive work. It is not dreamy or abstract. It requires precision of intention. Every time you speak with feeling to the deeper self, you are pressing a new groove into the field of mind. Over time, that groove becomes the path your life walks along. But here's the tension. Until the new path is clear enough, the old ones will call louder. Not because they are true, but because they are familiar. This is where most turn back. They pray once and watch. They speak one affirmation and look for proof. But suggestion doesn't bloom through performance. It blooms through certainty, through relaxed conviction. You do not beg the soil to grow what you planted. You trust, you water, you wait. And if weeds rise, you pull them, but you do not doubt the seed. There is a sacred breaking point in this process. It happens silently. You reach a moment where the old command no longer rules you, not because it vanished, but because it lost your agreement. You stop reacting to it. You stop defending against it. You feel it rise, and you watch it fade. And in its place, a new voice rises not, louder, but deeper. This is the rise the moment. You feel power return, not because you did something grand, but because you chose something true. You stopped waiting to feel ready. You decided to live from truth, even when the body still trembled. And in that moment, you became suggestion itself, not just the receiver, the source. Then comes the sink, the grief of realizing how long you lived from the wrong command, the years of bending to an inner lie, the people you hurt trying to protect the belief, the opportunities lost to fear. This grief is sacred. Let it break you, but not in despair and clarity. Let it pour through your chest like rain on scorched earth. Because then comes the break. That clean, subtle shift, when your system can no longer tolerate the old vibration. Not because you fought it, but because you outgrew it. It no longer fits your frequency. You speak now from a place that knows not hopes that thought creates form. That suggestion, once accepted, shapes what you see. And that you, the thinker, are no longer willing to be unconscious in your creation. This is not a spiritual high. It is a new baseline. You begin to live from it. You no longer ask, "Is it working?" Because you know that asking is doubt. You simply affirm, consistently, and without emotional strain. You assume the truth and let life align in due time, not out of apathy, but out of mastery. Because mastery is not dramatic, it is stable. You may still feel fear. You may still hear the old commands whisper, but you do not serve them. They are not your voice. They are echoes. And now, your voice. The new command is the only one with authority. Not because it is louder, but because it is true. So you speak it. You speak it in silence. You speak it when no one is listening. You speak it through the way you breathe, walk, respond, choose. And the world begins to shift not all at once, not with fireworks, but with precision. The people who once triggered you lose their grip. The situations that once drained you dissolve. And what replaces them is not a perfect life, but a clear one, a grounded one, a life shaped from the inside out. You are not becoming something. You are remembering what you always were beneath the noise. The subconscious accepts what you accept. So accept wisely, accept clearly. Accept with the full force of your being, not with hype, not with performance, but with settled, silent command. You were taught to pray as if you were outside the gate, to plead for access, to perform your desperation well enough to be heard. But that kind of prayer leaves you smaller than when you began. It assumes lack, and then calls it devotion. It wraps worry in sacred language and wonders why nothing changes. True prayer is not performed. It is claimed. When you pray from truth, not from fear, you don't bend to the problem. You rise into the solution, not with frantic energy, but with certainty. You don't have to scream your need to the sky. The subconscious does not hear volume. It hears tone. It listens to the emotional signature of your belief. This is why desperation blocks. It vibrates as lack. It feeds the very condition it wants to escape. You don't beg the law of gravity to hold you. You know it will. Prayer works in the same dimension of trust. When you pray from the awareness of divine law, you are not throwing a wish into the dark. You are aligning your consciousness with an invisible pattern that already exists. You are stepping into it not to impress the divine, but to impress it deeper into yourself. So posino in ritual, but in honesty. When you pray, what is the emotional fuel behind your words? If it's panic, then you're not really praying. You're amplifying the very thing you wish to dissolve. Prayer, real prayer, is not about convincing God. It's about convincing you. Convincing the subconscious that the new image you hold is the truer one. That the new state is the permanent one. That peace is no longer conditional, and healing no longer postponed. Joseph Murphy often reminded us that feeling is the secret, and this feeling must be nurtured not in the moment of crisis, but in the quiet beforehand. Because what you believe when things are calm is what will rise when things are not. This is preparation not for battle, but for embodiment. You cannot fake this. You cannot say the right words and hide the wrong energy. The subconscious knows the difference. The law knows the difference. Life itself moves from the blueprint of belief, not from the grammar of your requests. It's not listening for eloquence. It's listening for resonance. That's why prayer must be repeated not as superstition, but as saturation. You are not praying to make something happen. You are praying to make something real inside you. And when it becomes real within, it begins to express without, Not always quickly, not always how you expected, but always. There will be moments, quiet ones, where doubt still enters. You may find yourself asking again, but what if it doesn't work? When that thought arises, don't fight it. Don't resist it. Simply see it as an old suggestion surfacing for release. You don't need to engage it. You only need to rest back into truth. Return to the image. Return to the feeling. Let that be the prayer. There is a sacred silence between prayers. It is not emptiness. It is digestion. The subconscious doesn't require constant chatter. It requires consistency. You impress it, then release. You speak, then trust. You give the command, and then you live as though it were already done. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. When you pray in this way, the world does not always respond immediately, but you do. You respond with different posture. You treat yourself with greater dignity. You stop chasing approval. And slowly, quietly, your external world begins to reflect the new suggestion. A person changes. A door opens. A solution appears. And it feels inevitable not because you forced it, but because you finally allowed it. Real prayer doesn't ask for proof. It becomes the proof. You stop asking for a better life. You begin acting from it. And that action, consistent, clear, and emotionally congruent, becomes a living suggestion. Your very presence becomes a command, not over others, but over the atmosphere you carry, over the path you walk, over the vibration that shapes your days. You don't need to feel spiritual to pray this way. You don't need candles or symbols. You need only a quiet room and a willingness to believe, not just in a higher power, but in the power already placed in youth, power to direct thought, to choose feeling, to saturate the field of mind with vision instead of memory. And yes, there will be moments when it feels dead, when the prayer feels like words dropping into silence. That silence is not absence. It is soil. Do not panic when nothing seems to happen. Keep planting, keep impressing, keep aligning. The law is at work beneath the threshold of the visible. Your role is not to dig up the seed. Your role is to trust the process you cannot yet see. There is nothing more exhausting than praying from fear. There is nothing more transformative than praying from awareness. One drains, the other creates, and you get to choose. Every moment, every word, every feeling. You are not required to remain in survival mode. You are not obligated to continue rehearsing struggle in the name of humility. You are allowed to speak like someone whose prayer has already been answered. You are allowed to act from the finished image, not the broken one. Not because you are pretending, but because you are shifting identity at the root. And from that root, everything else will grow. You have been told the subconscious is your servant, but that is a misreading of power. The subconscious is not your slave. It is not a mindless receiver of random affirmations or force-fed positivity. It is intelligence, deep and unfiltered, and it responds not to control but to clarity. You don't command it by pressure. You cooperate with it by principle. This is where many lose their footing. They try to force results by sheer repetition, piling on words with urgency, repeating phrases they do not believe. But repetition without feeling is noise. And urgency is the language of doubt, not faith. The subconscious does not bow to panic. It does not respond to manipulation. It moves under suggestion only when the suggestion is accepted at the feeling level. That means what you feel consistently becomes your instruction to life. Not what you say in the mirror once a day, but what you feel when you're alone, what you dwell on in traffic, what runs in the background as you fall asleep. That's where the work happens. If you imagine the subconscious as a passive machine, you will miss its depth. It is creative. It absorbs not only data, but tone. It takes your most emotionally charged beliefs, whether you are aware of them or notan builds from them. It sculpts your days out of the patterns you reinforce, especially the ones you call normal. So, this is not a matter of speaking louder. It is a matter of feeling truer. You can't shout abundance into a mind trained in lack and expect lasting change. You must first identify what you truly believe about having, about being, about deserving. You must ask not as a chant, but as a compass. What have I made sacred in my emotional system? Because what's sacred to the subconscious is not what you wish, it's what you repeat with feeling. This is where personal honesty becomes liberation. If you are still rehearsing pain, still reliving old humiliations, still treating survival as your default, then that is the suggestion being made. And the subconscious, precise and obedient, will shape your world accordingly. It is not punishing you. It is obeying the deepest tone of your life. But here's the beauty. You can change the tone. Not by arguing with yourself, not by attacking the old belief, but by feeding a new one again and again until it becomes emotionally louder. When that happens, the subconscious shifts. Not because you demanded it, but because you nurtured it. You gave it a new pattern to trust. And trust is the soil from which all transformation grows. The work, then, is not drama, it is devotion. You sit with the new idea not once, but many times. You allow it to feel real. You walk with it as if it's already true. You feel what it would feel like to live from it, not toward it. This isn't pretending, it's practice. It's reconditioning the atmosphere of your inner life until it becomes the new command. This takes time, but not forever. It takes sincerity, but not strain. The moment you stop trying to overpower your subconscious and start learning to speak its language, everything changes. The language of the subconscious is not logic. It is image, repetition, and feeling. This is why you must become conscious of your inner dialogue, not to judge it, but to redirect it. Every time you allow yourself to mentally repeat a conclusion about who you are, you reinforce that identity. Every time you say, "I can't," the subconscious nods. Every time you expect disappointment, it adjusts your energy accordingly. This is not mystical, this is structure. And once you understand the structure, you don't fight it, you build within it. You recognize that the old suggestions were powerful only because they were consistent. Now you bring the same consistency to something new. You become the builder not of fantasy, but of inner truth, faithfully applied. This is not a quick fix path. It is a return to personal authorship. You stop waiting for someone to rescue you. You stop blaming what hurt you. You turn inward not to escape, but to reclaim. You begin to treat the subconscious not as something to overcome, but as something to partner with. And that partnership begins with respect. Respect that what you tell it matters. Respect that it is always listening. Respect that it is always building. Even when you're tired. Even when you don't feel like it. Even when the world contradicts what you are building inside. Especially then. Because that is where most give up, not because the method failed, but because the contradiction scared them. But the contradiction is not failure. It is friction. And friction is part of transformation. When the subconscious is being reshaped, the old suggestions do not disappear quietly. They flare. They test your commitment. They ask, "Are you sure?" Not to punish you, but to confirm whether the new belief is rooted or reactive. This is the moment where many collapse believing the process doesn't work. But that moment is not a signal to quit. It is a signal to go deeper. Hold the new feeling longer. Repeat the new idea more gently. Wrap it in vision. Wrap it in gratitude. Speak it not to erase the past, but to impress the future. And as you do, the subconscious listens. Slowly at first, then with certainty. And it begins the work, quiet, faithful, unstoppable, of building your life to match the command. There is no suggestion without emotion. You can repeat the most carefully crafted phrase 1,000 times, but if it lands with no feeling, it vanishes like breath on glass. The subconscious doesn't respond to syllable sit, responds to vibration, and that vibration is carried by emotion. Every belief you now hold with certainty was once an idea that touched you deeply, not just intellectually, but emotionally. Something happened, a moment, a conversation, a wound. And in that moment, you felt something so strongly that it impressed upon you. It carved itself into the nervous system. And from then on, it operated beneath the surface as a silent command. This is how suggestion becomes fate. Not because fate is written, but because emotion sets it in motion. Thought alone is a spark. But when fused with feeling, it becomes a current. That current begins to draw people, patterns, opportunities all, to match the frequency of what you have emotionally accepted. This is why emotional memory is so powerful. Not because it is true, but because it is charged. Something that happened once continues to live in you, not because of time, but because of intensity. If you keep returning to a memory and re-feeling it, you are not remembering, you are re-impressing. The subconscious doesn't know that it's in the past. It only knows that you feel it again. And so, it prepares your body and your life to reflect it again. But this law cuts both ways. You can use it to recreate pain, you can use it to embody truth. If you want to change what your subconscious accepts, you must link the new idea to real feeling. Not forced excitement, not empty chanting, but authentic emotional agreement. That may come as relief, as joy, as gratitude, as quiet knowing. What matters is that it feels real to you, because only what feels real gets planted. The spiritual teachers who understood this best didn't tell you to scream affirmations into the void. They told you to live from the end, to see the wish fulfilled, to dwell in the state of the desired result as if it were already so, not just in thought, but in tone, in attitude, in energy. You don't need to act your way through the day like you're pretending to be someone else. You need to feel your way into a new identity until that feeling becomes natural. Until it becomes so normal that you no longer try to believe it, you simply do. That is how you impress the subconscious. Through saturation of feeling, not repetition of words. Through internal agreement, not external force. Through emotionally congruent living, not performative positivity. You've seen this in your own life already. The moments you were most certain good or bad were the moments things moved fast. When you felt something in your gut, events seemed to unfold to match it. When you knew without doubt that something was coming, it often did. Not because of magic, because of alignment. The feeling aligned with the belief, and the belief sent out a silent instruction. So what feeling are you living from now? Not the one you hope for. The one that lingers in your chest when you're not performing. That feeling is writing your script. That feeling is shaping your day. If it's fear, then life will find ways to match it, not as punishment, but as obedience. But here's the liberation. The moment you inject a new feeling into your mental image, the blueprint begins to change. Even if you don't see it immediately, even if the world looks the same for a while. The seed has been changed, and given time, the form must follow. This is why prayer without feeling falls flat. Why vision boards without internal movement become decorations. Why affirmations that don't touch the heart never take root. You must feel it, not hype, not noise, but conviction, the quiet, unwavering sensation of truth. When that arises, the subconscious shifts, because now it has something real to build from. So, begin gently. Don't try to bulldoze your way to emotional certainty. Don't try to fake what you don't yet feel. Instead, find the images, the memories, the hopes that truly move you. Sit with them, dwell in them. Let them rise naturally, let them saturate you, and then speak not from force, but from resonance. I am safe. I am guided. I am enough. Not shouted, but felt. And when that feeling is present even for a few seconds, you have made a real suggestion, a spiritual command, one that echoes beyond the surface, one that begins to carve a new pattern in the subconscious, one that the body will obey, one that the world must eventually reflect. This is not romanticism, this is law. And the law says, what you feel with intensity and repeat with sincerity becomes form, not because you deserve it, not because you earned it, but because that is how consciousness works. So do not wait to feel it perfectly. Begin with what is real. Begin with what is small. Let the feeling grow. Let it take shape. Let it become the emotional tone of your life. And then, watch as the world begins to shift, not from effort, but from alignment. You are not here to repeat old emotions. You are here to create new ones, and through them, to create a new life. You have been conditioned to obey many voices. Some were loud, some were subtle, but all carried a message. And the ones that repeated often enough, especially those delivered with emotion or authority, became part of your inner structure. You didn't just hear them, you accepted them, you agreed. The outer voice becomes the inner law. That is the mechanics of suggestion. It doesn't matter if the voice was wrong, it matters that it was believed. Think back without blame. Think to the rules you live by now that you never consciously chose. Not the ones you say out loud, but the ones that drive your quiet decisions. Rules like, don't ask for too much, or, if I'm not needed, I'm not loved, or something will always go wrong. You didn't write these, but someone did, and they handed them to you with tone, with repetition, with timing. And because you were open, perhaps young, perhaps desperate for belonging, you let them in. This is not about bitterness, it's about awareness. The subconscious does not sort by justice. It accepts what you accept, even if what you accept is harmful, even if it cages you in. This is why the question of authority matters. Not outer authority, but inner permission. Who are you still obeying inside? What voice are you still deferring to in moments of doubt? Whose judgment are you trying not to trigger? Whose expectations are you still fulfilling in secret? Until these inner laws are seen, they cannot be changed. They will continue to run your life, shaping your posture, shrinking your joy, limiting your capacity, and all of it will feel like choice. But it isn't choice, it's programming. The irony is that you are already powerful. The fact that you have lived according to these unconscious laws proves it. Your subconscious has created the perfect reflection of your accepted beliefs. It is obedient to a fault. It does not ask, should we keep living from this? It simply says, this is what we know, and it continues. But here's what changes everything. The moment you say, no more, with emotional clarity, the old command begins to dissolve. Not because you hate it, but because you no longer believe it. The grip breaks when you stop obeying. When you no longer give your sacred attention to a belief that drains you, when you revoke the permission you once gave to fear, you don't have to yell. You don't have to fight the old voice. You only have to stop kneeling to it. When a new suggestion is spoken not just in words, but in tone, in posture, in action, it begins to rewrite the structure. And the subconscious, always faithful, begins to follow. Not immediately, but reliably. You become your own authority, not in rebellion, but in revelation. You begin to speak from a place that feels foreign at first, not because it isn't you, but because it's new. You say, I am worthy, and your body doesn't yet believe it. You say, I am whole, and the old voices laugh. But you continue not in defiance, but in steadiness. You speak until it starts to land, until the old voices grow quiet, until they become background noise. And then, something shifts. Your decisions change. Your boundaries solidify. You stop explaining your choices to people who have not earned your vulnerability. You stop seeking approval from those who taught you to shrink. And most of all, you stop negotiating with voices that never had your freedom in mind. You begin to live from a deeper source, and that source is you, the part of you untouched by programming, unshaken by conditioning, the part that remembers who you were before you were told who to be. This is not arrogance. This is restoration. You are not here to obey someone else's idea of what is possible for you. You are not here to inherit spiritual ceilings from ancestors who were too afraid to dream. You are here to choose. And that choice begins the moment you reclaim inner authority. So how do you do it? You stop giving your agreement to any idea that weakens you. You stop reinforcing assumptions that treat you as small, as separate, as broken. You stop speaking as if you are powerless. You stop praying as if your desire is dangerous. You stop letting outdated fears define your steps. Instead, you begin to listen for what is true or not, what is safe, not what is familiar, but what is deeply, quietly true. And when you find it, you agree with it, emotionally, repeatedly, until that truth becomes the dominant command. And once it does, everything that once obeyed fear begins to obey truth. Your thoughts shift, your behavior evolves, your presence deepens, and life responsive as ever follows your lead. Because that is the law. What you accept with feeling becomes the architecture of your experience. What you emotionally obey becomes the pattern your life must follow. You don't need to make a scene. You don't need to declare anything to the world. Just stand quietly, inwardly, and say, I no longer obey the old voice. I follow truth now. And let that be the new law. Every day, without your consent, suggestions pass through you. Not dramatic, one subtle, quiet, laced with casual certainty. They come in headlines, in the tone of a friend's complaint, in the tension of someone's silence, in the advertisements that assume what you lack, in the stories people tell that end in failure. These suggestions don't need to shout, they just need to be repeated. Because repetition, especially repetition wrapped in emotion, builds familiarity. And familiarity is the path to belief. This is how the world impresses itself upon you without force. It wears you down with patterns. It rehearses limitations so often that you begin to expect it. It tells the same story in 1,000 different voices. Life is hard, people can't be trusted, money is scarce, love is pain, not as facts, but as emotional atmospheres, as shared moods. And because you are human, because you long to belong, you let these moods in first as curiosity, then as agreement. This is why suggestion is not just a private practice. It is a daily battlefield. You are not just managing your own mind. You are navigating a world steeped in unconscious influence. The subconscious does not distinguish between inner and outer sources. If a message is repeated often enough, especially by people you trust, it begins to feel like your own. So, the first act of power is recognition. To notice what is trying to claim space in your mind, to ask, quietly and steadily, does this suggestion serve the life I am building? Or is it a seed of fear disguised as realism? You are not meant to walk through the world with armor. You are not meant to hide from conversation or block out everyone who doesn't match your frequency. That's not power, that's fragility, dressed in control. What you need is not avoidance. What you need is discernment. Discernment doesn't panic. It watches, it listens, and it chooses. It doesn't need to fight every false idea. It simply refuses to give it room. You can hear a suggestion without letting it plant. You can read a headline without adopting its fear. You can love someone without agreeing with their limitation. This is the maturity of spiritual sovereignty, the ability to walk among unconscious suggestion without being shaped by it. You do this by anchoring yourself, not just once, but daily. You begin your day with an inner tonea vibration that becomes your home base. You set the feeling before the world speaks. You repeat what is true before the noise begins. You saturate your inner space so deeply that the outer world has no gap to slip into. This is not superstition. It is hygiene. Mental hygiene is as essential as physical. You do not question the need to bathe your body. Why would you neglect to cleanse your mind? You don't let people put their hands on you without permission. Why would you let them put their fears in you without question? And yet, we do, every day, through media, through gossip, through passive agreement with hopelessness. Not because we are weak, but because we are unaware. That ends now. You begin to watch your inputs not out of fear, but out of wisdom. You notice the tone of what you consume, not just the content, but the emotional residue. Do you leave a conversation more grounded or more anxious? Do you walk away from a movie more open or more shut down? These things matter, not because they define you, but because they influence your atmosphere, and your atmosphere is what the subconscious breathes. So fill it with clarity, with vision, with truth. Speak your own suggestion so often, so sincerely, that it becomes louder than the world's static. This isn't denial of reality. It is creation of a higher one. You are allowed to reject what does not build you. You are allowed to say, that story isn't mine, even if the whole room agrees with it, even if the whole culture worships it. You are allowed to live in a new narrative, and not as escape, but as authority. You are not better than others for choosing differently. You are simply awake. And being awake means you can no longer accept suggestion blindly. This vigilance will feel strange at first. You may feel detached. You may feel like you're swimming against the current. But soon, you will feel lighter. You will feel clearer. The background noise will fade. And what's left will be you, your tone, your truth, your chosen command. This is how spiritual strength is built. Not through withdrawal, but through presence, through choice, through knowing what is yours and what is not. The world is not going to stop offering suggestions, but you don't need it to. You only need to choose which ones you let in, and once you reclaim that power, the noise no longer owns you. The fear no longer plants in you. You become still while the world stirs. And from that stillness, you begin to shape the day not as a reaction, but as a creation. You were not designed to block thoughts. You were designed to choose them. When you try to suppress or control your mind through sheer resistance, it only fights back louder. That's not mastery. That's tension disguised as discipline. Real control isn't force, it's stewardship. The mind, especially the subconscious, doesn't respond to being silenced. It responds to being guided. It thrives not when you declare war on your thoughts, but when you take full responsibility for your focus. Your attention is sacred. It is the gateway through which all suggestion enters. Whatever you repeatedly give attention to, you invite into form. And most people don't lose power through one tragic moment. They lose it slowly, by leaking attention. Drip by drip, scroll by scroll, worry by worry, until there's no room left inside for the truth to take hold. This is why attention must be trained, not strained, not with judgment, not with fear, but with intention. You don't need to fight every negative thought. You need only decide what you dwell on. Because what you dwell on, you imprint, you plant, you water. And over time, the subconscious treats it as real. It takes your most rehearsed attention as law, and it moves to fulfill it, piece by piece, with perfect fidelity. So the question becomes, what are you rehearsing? Not what you hope for, not what you affirm once in a while, what you think about when you're not thinking on purpose. That idle inner monologue, that's the real prayer. That's where suggestion lives. That's where reality begins. You don't have to be afraid of passing thoughts. You're not judged for having fear or sadness or memory. But you are responsible for where you pitch your tent, where you build your home, where you decide to live emotionally. This is the power most never claim. Because it isn't loud, it doesn't feel dramatic, but it's absolute. When you master attention, you master suggestion. And when you master suggestion, you master your experience. But this isn't about locking your focus in a rigid place all day. That's performance. That's unsustainable. True mastery is fluid. It moves, but it moves on purpose. You feel the fear rise, and instead of spiraling, you pause. You notice it. You name it. And then you choose not to feed it. You return your attention not to denial, but to design. To the inner image you are cultivating with care. And you sit with it long enough for it to start feeling real. This is not quick work, but it is clean work. It clears your field. It sharpens your presence. And it gradually shifts your baseline from survival to creation. Over time, the mind becomes less noisy. Not because you forced it to be quiet, but because you stopped energizing the noise. You stopped rewarding chaos with your focus. You stopped giving every anxious thought the dignity of a full conversation. And the result? You begin to live in mental order. You begin to think from the inside out, not the outside in. You begin to walk into the world with a chosen vibration, not a reactive one. This is why the ancient teachers emphasized watchfulness, not paranoia, not spiritual perfectionism, but the quiet, sacred art of choosing what gets in. Your subconscious is a fertile field. It does not ask whether the seed is good or bad. It only asks, was it planted? Was it watered? Was it felt? And if the answer is yes, then it grows. You can't stop every seed from flying past you, but you can choose which ones you take in, which ones you nurture, which ones you allow to root. So protect the gateway not by building walls, but by setting standards. Not every opinion deserves your consideration. Not every fear deserves your exploration. Not every image deserves your energy. This is not avoidance. This is alignment. When you start your day with mental clarity, with a chosen suggestion, repeated and felt, you set the tone. And once the tone is set, the day must begin to move to its rhythm. Not all at once, but inevitably, because tone is more powerful than circumstance. Emotionally felt suggestion is more powerful than external fact. And you always get to choose where your attention lives. If it drifts, bring it back, not with punishment, but with patience. If you forget, return. If you spiral, reset, again and again. Because repetition is the language of the subconscious, and suggestion repeated with care becomes destiny. So do not try to silence the mind. Guide it. Do not try to escape thought. Refine it. And most of all, do not abandon your attention to chance. Hold it like a flame in wind, not with force, but with devotion. Because what you attend to becomes you. You are always praying, not just when you close your eyes, not just when you light a candle, not just when you whisper words into the dark. Every inner conversation, every mental rehearsal, every thought you return to with feeling this is prayer. This is suggestion, and it is always at work. Prayer is not a ritual, it's a pattern. The way you speak to yourself when no one's around is more powerful than any formal declaration. That quiet voice that says, "I always mess this up," or "I'll never have what I need," or even worse, "This is just who I am." Those are not harmless habits, they are instructions. And your subconscious is listening. You do not have to shout to plant an idea. You only have to repeat it, with belief, with emotion, and with enough consistency that it becomes the new, dominant tone of your being. And here's the part most people miss. Even sarcasm is suggestion. Even jokes you make about your failures are planting something. Even passive self-criticism, dressed as humor, gets recorded. The subconscious doesn't laugh with you. It just logs what you emphasize. This is why planting by design is so vital. Because if you don't plant on purpose, you plant by default. If you don't speak the truth to your inner self, the old noise fills the space. The memory of shame, the inherited voice of limitation, the programming of trauma, these things do not disappear because you outgrew them. They fade only when replaced. So replace them, not with wishful thinking, but with real suggestion spoken, written, imagined, and most of all, felt. This is not about pretending life is perfect. It's about choosing what you're going to root your mind in. It's about deciding which inner dialogue gets to become your architecture. That decision happens daily. And it happens not with grand gestures, but with quiet moments. The way you speak to yourself when you make a mistake. The tone you use when you look in the mirror. The story you tell when you reflect on your future. These are prayers. These are impressions. And they are far more powerful than any public declaration. This is why so many people struggle with change. They try to willpower their way through old beliefs, but never update the tone of their inner voice. They push their lives forward with outer effort, but drag their identity backwards with every silent self-attack. The subconscious doesn't obey effort. It obeys identity. And identity is built sentence by sentence, image by image, word by word. So when you plant intentionally. When you speak to yourself, speak from who you are, becoming not who you fear you are. Do not ask the subconscious for permission. Declare. Declare with presence, with rhythm, with care. Let your inner words match the life you want to build. If you want freedom, speak as someone who is no longer in chains. If you want love, speak as someone already worthy. If you want healing, speak as someone already whole. Not because you're lying, but because you are stepping into truth. You are building a new command structure inside your own mind, one that does not echo fear, one that does not serve trauma, one that stands clear, steady, and alive. And yes, there will be resistance. You will hear the old phrases return. The ones that sound like your voice but aren't really yours. The ones you picked up from someone else's disappointment. The ones you memorized in survival. Let them rise. Do not argue. Do not entertain them. Let them pass like clouds across a sky you no longer bow to. Then return to your command. Repeat it. Breathe into it. Let it move from your throat to your chest, from your chest to your gut. Let it take root, not because you shouted it, but because you stayed with it. Because you planted it over and over until it started to grow. This is how life changes. Not just through action, but through identity reformation. And identity is rewritten through suggestion, intimate, personal, emotionally charged suggestion. You are not powerless in this. Your thoughts are not random. Your words are not empty. They are creative agents. They are forming the field from which your future will rise. Every time you catch yourself slipping into old programming and redirect your tone, you shift the pattern. You interrupt the loop. You give the subconscious something new to work with. And when that new seed is planted with intention, with repetition, and with emotional resonance, it must grow. So, speak to yourself with sacred care, not just once. Daily, hourly, if needed. Speak not as a motivator, but as an author. Speak not to mask, but to mold. Let your inner voice become your spiritual blueprint. Let your self-talk become the prayer that builds your becoming. And in time, what you once said in faith, you will say as fact. There are patterns in your life that don't belong to you. They repeat, not because they are essential, but because they have been allowed. They have been obeyed, and what is obeyed is reinforced. Not because you chose ITAT, least not consciously, but because you never revoked the original command. The subconscious is loyal to the most familiar suggestion. That's it. It's not loyal to truth, not loyal to what's right or even beneficial. It's loyal to what you've fed it consistently. That means old patterns especially, the painful ones, are often just well-fed lies. They're not embedded in your soul. They're embedded in your repetition. If something keeps showing up in your life, self-sabotage, toxic relationships, scarcity, stagnationites, not just coincidence, it's a loop. And a loop continues until something interrupts it. That interruption doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to look like fire or fury. In fact, the most powerful shift often begins in silence. It begins with no longer agreeing, with noticing the script and refusing to rehearse it again. You begin by seeing the pattern, not with shame, but with clarity. You watch how you respond to certain triggers. You trace your reactions to their roots. You recognize how quickly an old belief steps in to define what's possible for you. And then, in that moment, you pause. You feel the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize for wanting more, to wait for permission, and you don't follow it. That pause is power. It may last a second, but it breaks the loop, because every loop is just a rehearsal. It depends on your participation. Stop rehearsing it, and it weakens. It loses its force. The subconscious may try to repeat it anyway, like a reflex. But without your emotional agreement, it begins to dissolve. This is the moment where old patterns start to die. Not because you declared war on them, but because you starved them of energy. They fed on your attention, your belief, your willingness to stay small, and when you withdrew those, they lost their power source. You don't need to prove the old suggestion wrong. You need only stop serving it. This isn't about positive thinking. It's about non-cooperation with what drains you. It's about recognizing the invisible places where you say yes to an identity you no longer want. You might not say it out loud, but every time you expect rejection, you're saying it. Every time you assume failure before you begin, you're saying it. Every time you feel guilt for your desire, you're saying it. And now you stop. Not by pretending the fear isn't there, but by not giving it authority. You let it speak, but you don't obey. You let it rise, but you don't run. You stand in a new awareness that who you are becoming is stronger than what you have survived. And from this awareness, you start issuing new commands. You speak not to convince yourself, but to replace what no longer serves. You begin to feed the mind something different. Not perfect thoughts, but chosen ones. Not lofty affirmations you can't feel, but real declarations you can stand in. I don't live that way anymore. I no longer serve that fear. This thought doesn't own me. And most of all, I choose differently now. These aren't slogans. They're spiritual decisions, and with each one, the subconscious shifts, not instantly, but steadily. The old commands begin to fade not because they're deleted, but because they are dethroned. They are no longer the loudest voice. They are no longer fed. This process will test you. There will be days when the pattern feels stronger than your will, when the familiar pain rises like a tide, when everything in you wants to revert. That's not failure. That's momentum being undone. The loop flares before it dies. So let it flare. Let it scream. Let it tempt you with comfort disguised as destiny, and let it pass. You are not required to feel powerful to choose powerfully. You just need to remain still, clear, decided. And in that stillness, the new command settles deeper. You become someone who no longer repeats what doesn't belong. You stop telling the old story not just out loud, but internally. You stop describing your life in terms of pain. You stop identifying with the wound. You start speaking from the healing, from the possibility, from the new identity that's been waiting to emerge. And the subconscious, faithful as ever, begins to respond. It updates the pattern. It reconfigures the signals. It allows the new loop to form not from trauma, but from truth. You are not stuck. You are saturated. And now, you begin to dry out the lee until the soil is ready for something real. Silence is not the absence of thought. It is the ground from which thought emerges. And when you stop trying to fill the silence with answers, you begin to feel the weight of suggestion moving beneath it. Silence is not passive. It is generative. In silence, ideas are not forced. They rise. In silence, old patterns have room to unravel. In silence, the most honest images surface anew because they were hidden maliciously, but because you were too loud to hear them. You see, the voice of the soul does not compete. It waits. And when you fall quiet, not empty, but open, you begin to hear the real commands you've been living under. You may think you're operating from clarity, but silence reveals otherwise. Silence shows you the way you flinch before asking, the way you shrink before speaking, the way you pre-reject yourself before life can even respond. These habits, invisible in noise, are unmistakable in stillness. And that's the gift of it. Silence strips away justification. It removes distraction. And what's left is the honest vibration of your life. Not what you show others, what you truly accept. This is why silence is so often avoided, not because it's boring, but because it's illuminating. It reveals what you've believed, not what you claim. It shows you whether your inner climate is grounded in truth or running on automatic submission to fear. And yet, when you stay in that stillness, when you refuse to distract yourself, you begin to feel something else underneath, the quiet hum of power. Not dramatic, not performative. Just a subtle knowing that you are not the noise. You are the space beneath it. You are the listener, not the fear. You are the still one, the one who chooses, who shapes, who speaks inwardly before anything external begins. This realization is not mystical. It is functional. Because once you anchor in that silence, you realize something crucial. You do not have to fight for power. You already have it. You do not have to prove your worth to your subconscious. You only have to speak to it clearly, without the noise of doubt cluttering your intention. This is where the most profound suggestions are matino in a rush, not in a chant, but in still, clear, emotionally grounded silence. You think the mind needs stimulation to change. But that's not true. The most powerful moments of reprogramming happen when the nervous system is still, when the body is not performing, when the breath is deep and slow. That is when the subconscious is most impressionable. That is when truth lands not as concept, but as frequency. So you enter the silence not to escape life, but to shape it. You do not empty the mind. You clear it. You release the clutter. You let go of the frantic need to control outcomes. You sit with the truth long enough for it to root itself not as fantasy, but as the new command. And the command is always felt before it is seen. In this space, you don't argue with the old suggestions. You don't beg for change. You don't repeat mantras with gritted teeth. You simply let the deeper truth rise. And when it does, you agree with it not through performance, but through stillness. That agreement doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It settles in your bones. It adjusts your breathing. It reorients your posture. That's how you know the suggestion has landed. Not because you declared it perfectly, but because you feel no need to convince anymore. From this silence, you begin to live. You speak from a place that is not trying to be powerful, but simply is. You walk into rooms without explaining yourself. You take action without needing applause. You pray without waiting to feel spiritual. You no longer seek validation from outside. Because the stillness taught you something the world never could. That your truest commands are not made through noise. They are made through inner agreement. And that agreement is born in silence. This is not inactivity. This is alignment. The more you practice silence as a meditative escape, but as a creative space, the more clearly your suggestions take form. You begin to notice which ideas hold weight and which fall flat. You stop speaking out of habit. You speak because something real has formed in you. And when the suggestion is born in that kind of silence, it carries the full charge of your being. The subconscious feels it, and it begins to shift the outer to match it. Not always dramatically, but certainly, undeniably. So stop fearing the quiet. Let it speak. Let it rearrange you. Let it teach you that the most powerful words are often whispered inside, without an audience, without effort, without strain. Let it teach you that creation begins, not with speaking, but with listening. And from there, suggestion becomes not just a method, but a way of being. Belief is not a decoration. It is architecture. You are not dabbling in ideas, you are constructing reality. And every belief you hold, whether consciously chosen or carelessly inherited, becomes part of that construction. What you believe does not simply affect how you feel. It organizes what you see. It dictates what you expect. It shapes what you attract, what you pursue, what you tolerate, and what you create. The blueprint of your life was never in the stars. It has always been in the mind. But not the fleeting mind, the mind beneath the surface, the realm of assumed truths, the place where suggestion becomes identity, and identity becomes structure. If you want to know what you believe, look at what repeats, not just in your thoughts, but in your results. Belief is not just thought, it is thought fused with expectation. You may say with your lips, "I am worthy." But if the dominant expectation beneath that statement is rejection or struggle, the deeper belief always wins. The subconscious doesn't act on what you want to believe. It acts on what you feel is inevitable. And when you understand that, belief becomes something sacred, something to be held with intention and spoken with precision. You are not here to perform beliefs you don't feel. You are here to form beliefs you can live inside. Form them carefully. Examine the structure of your inner world. What do you assume when you wake up? What do you quietly expect when money comes in? When someone compliments you? When opportunity knocks? These subtle cues will tell you more about your true beliefs than any affirmation ever could. You may be surprised by what you find. Beliefs handed to you long ago, never questioned. Beliefs passed down like family recipes, bitter, constricting, unquestioned. Beliefs that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. These are the unseen scaffolds behind your habits, your reactions, your self-image. And here's the turning point. They are editable. Beliefs are not concrete. They are repeated conclusions. They are emotional decisions made long ago, often in pain and never revisited. But they can be revised. And the moment you start to speak a new belief into that subconscious space, backed by repetition and emotion, the architecture begins to shift. Not just in theory. In form, you don't have to believe it perfectly for it to work. You have to practice it consistently until the new shape holds. You let the words of truth become familiar, not to impress the subconscious, but to teach it a new pattern. You return to the same spiritual conviction again and again, not because the universe forgot, but because you are still forming it inside. And belief, once formed, is a force. Once you truly believe that you are supported, you stop acting like you're alone. Once you believe you are enough, you stop performing for crumbs. Once you believe abundance is your nature, your life adjusts to that frequency, not overnight, but unavoidably. This is not magic. This is causation. Belief is not fragile. It can hold a life. It can rebuild a future. It can anchor you in moments of doubt and move mountains that logic cannot touch. But you must treat it like the builder it is. Feed it carefully. Challenge it when it weakens. Reinforce it with evidence. Let it show up in your tone, in your schedule, in your presence. And yes, belief will be tested. Not because the universe is cruel, but because tests reveal what is still conditional. The old structure will push back. The external will contradict the new blueprint. But this is not failure, it's formation. This is where belief stops being theory and becomes foundation. So, when you are tested, return. Return to the inner truth, not with trembling, but with conviction. Repeat the suggestion not to beg for change, but to confirm your identity. You are no longer experimenting with truth. You are living from it. Let your belief become predictable. Let it become unshakable. Let it inform your posture, your tone, your silence, your action. Let it replace the old assumptions until the subconscious no longer recognizes the outdated commands. And from that place, belief settled, suggestion saturated, you will find the world responding in kind. The blueprint adjusts and the structure follows. What once felt unreachable becomes natural. What once felt mystical becomes methodical. What once felt like fate becomes feedback. Because belief is not what you visit. It is what you build from. And once built, it holds. There is a moment in the process of inner transformation that feels hollow. You've planted the new idea. You've repeated it. You've even felt it, believed it, lived in its vibration. And still, nothing seems to move. The external world stays the same. The people act the same. The problems remain untouched. And in that space, a voice rises not of truth, but of frustration. It says, "It's not working." This is the temptation to abandon the process, to doubt the law, to treat suggestion like a vending machine, insert thought, receive result. But the subconscious does not operate on your clock. And truth does not obey your need for quick proof. The law is not failing you. It is unfolding. The delay between suggestion and form is not silence. It is gestation. And if you misread that delay, you interrupt the miracle. You dig up the seed before the root is even set. You judge the process by appearances, and in doing so, you break faith with the unseen. This is the true test of inner command. Can you hold the suggestion even when the outer contradicts it? Can you live from the image without needing evidence every hour? Can you trust that the shift has begun not because you see it, but because you know it? Because your vibration changed, your focus changed, your belief changed. And once that inner command is issued, reality must obey first subtly, then steadily, then obviously. You are not waiting. You are becoming. And the becoming is the answer. Life responds to your inner state, but not always in ways that you can predict. Sometimes it strips away first. Sometimes it rearranges relationships, uncovers wounds, exposes false attachments. And all of it feels like collapse when in truth, it's clearing. The unseen answer often comes as a crisis of clarity. Something breaks. A habit ends. An old identity no longer fits. And this is sacred, not a setback, a signal. You are no longer aligned with what once fed on your unconscious patterns. You are no longer available for the version of life that required your silence, your smallness, your self-betrayal. And as that version fades, the new form rushes to take its place. But it doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives through resonance. You begin to notice your reactions shifting. Your language softens into strength. You no longer feel the same hunger to prove. You don't panic in the pause. You don't explain yourself in rooms that cannot hear. These are the signs, the quiet ones, the ones that matter most. Because long before the outer changes, you've already changed. And that inner shift, the realignment of attention, of suggestion, of belief is the true manifestation. The external is only confirmation. This is where your old self might cry out. Not from truth, but from habit. It may whisper, "What if nothing comes?" And you, no longer needing reassurance, answer back, "It already has. I am already living in the vibration of it. I am already saturated with the knowing of it." You no longer plant to get. You plant because this is who you are now. Someone who creates from inner authority. Someone who knows the law is never inactive, only invisible for a time. And that time is not punishment. It is protection. It is preparation. It is precision. If the answer came too soon, you wouldn't have the structure to hold it. If the form arrived before the identity, it would collapse. So the law waits not out of cruelty, but out of love. It waits for the vibration to settle, for the self-image to lock in, for the suggestion to stop flickering and start glowing. That glow is the signal. And the moment that glow stabilizes, life answers, quietly, certainly, with people, with pathways, with provision, not because you forced it, but because you became it. The world did not give it to you. You gave it to the world. This is the unseen answer, and it is already moving toward you. Hold the vibration, not because you are desperate, but because you are aligned. Speak the command, not for proof, but for presence. Live the new identity, not to attract, but to embody. And from that embodiment, everything follows. You were never meant to live at the mercy of suggestion. You were meant to master it, not by avoiding the world, not by silencing your mind into stillness, but by becoming conscious deeply, calmly, unapologetically conscious of the source from which your life is shaped, the inner command. Every result, every repeated cycle, every pattern you've called fate, began with a tone inside you, a tone that turned into an image that hardened into belief, a belief that shaped your identity. And identity always seeks confirmation, so you saw what matched, ignored what didn't, and called it truth. But suggestion is not truth, it is direction. And you can change direction. Right now. The real shift doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a quiet clarity, a line drawn not in defiance but in decision. A moment when you say not loudly but with finality, "I do not think like that anymore. I do not believe that version of myself anymore." That story is over. And that is the moment the subconscious listens, not to noise, not to drama, but to vibration, to the certainty beneath your words, to the emotional finality of that choice. That's when it starts rewriting the code. That's when your biology, your habits, your reactions begin to take new shape. You don't become a new person. You become the real one, the one that was buried under decades of passive suggestion, the one that knew what was possible before the world whispered limitations into your open heart, the one that dreamed without shame, who didn't ask for permission to be whole, who didn't interpret failure as identity. This version of you has always been waiting, not as a fantasy, but as a command left unspoken. Now you speak it, with tone, with breath, with posture, with repetition, not because you're trying to convince yourself, but because you've remembered who you are. There is nothing mystical about this. The law is neutral. It will shape what you feed it. If you feed it fear, it will grow structures of hesitation and delay. If you feed it guilt, it will give you a life of self-punishment and spiritual fatigue. If you feed it longing without identity, it will keep you in search mode, never in receiving. But feed it clarity, calm, persistent clarity, and it will remake the world in your image. You were never meant to pray like a beggar. You were meant to speak like a creator, to suggest from the truth of being, not the panic of need, to instruct life, not chase it, to issue the silent command, not once, not in crisis, but as your daily rhythm. And when that rhythm becomes your resting state, the extraordinary becomes ordinary. You stop waiting, you stop forcing, you stop explaining, you embody, and what you embody, you attract. Not by effort, by law. This is the final threshold. Not where you become someone new, but where you stop rehearsing who you are not, where you stop issuing commands from an outdated version of self, where you return with grace and conviction to the truth. I am the silent command. Your life does not answer to the noise of the world. It answers to the tone of your being, and that tone is yours to set. So set it. Speak not from memory, but from destiny, and let life follow. You've come far. Not because you've learned something new, but because you've remembered what you always knew in your quietest moments, beneath the chaos, beneath the performing, beneath the fear. You remembered that creation starts inside. That suggestion is not a trick, but a tool, and that every word you speak into the silence shapes the architecture of your world. You remembered that prayer is not performance, it is agreement. That belief is not fantasy, it is form. That silence is not absence, it is power. And now you begin, not with urgency, but with presence. You speak with fewer words, but more weight. You no longer beg life to change. You instruct it. Gently, consistently. You speak from the end, and you live as though it were already true. Because it is. Your world is shifting, not because you've earned it, but because you've aligned with it. The old loops are losing oxygen. The new suggestions are taking root. You no longer echo the voice of fear, you echo the voice of truth. And as that truth settles, the subconscious, faithful, obedient, miraculous, builds the life to match it. So rest now. Let it unfold. Let the vibration stabilize. Let the command do its work. Because it is already done.